was always the Jags. It's always the Jags. It's always the Jags. Always the Jags.
Welcome back into Always the Jags. It's your host, King Whale. This is your number one podcast to get everything Jacksonville, everything Jaguars, everything Duval. Today we're going to break down our free agency class. And clearly, the Jaguars didn't really, I don't know if they just missed it or something. Maybe they didn't get my emails. But clearly, James Gladstone did not see my free agency wish list because the Jaguars didn't do anything I asked in free agency. But you know, it's fine. This is the way it goes. So we're going to take a look at what we ended up doing. That of course was significantly. First, we're going to talk about the releasing of Evan Ingram as well, because we talked about Christian Kirk. And then I think we already discussed the retirement of Mitch Morse, but how that played a huge role into free agency as well. So we'll go ahead and dive right in. So obviously, Evan Ingram was released, right? Now, originally on my podcast, I had said that I'm okay if we end up releasing Evan Ingram and Christian Kirk if we get Travis Hunter, right? Because I feel like having Travis Hunter, Brian Thomas Jr., Brenton Strange, that assortment of weapons, Parker Washington is there already as well. I feel like that's a very good assortment of weapons for Trevor Lawrence to work with. And I feel like we could get by without Evan Ingram or without Christian Kirk, but I didn't think we'd get by without both, unless we had a game changer like Travis Hunter. Well, looks like we're going to have to get by without both because we didn't end up, we don't know if we're going to get the game changer in Travis Hunter, right? We didn't move up, and we'll talk about how what other teams did in free agency kind of affects us. So we'll do that on the next episode, but for right now, I'm just going to talk about us. So these are our moves. Now I'm going to start with my favorite one that I maybe even liked better than my suggestion, but my favorite one was the signing of Patrick Mekari from the Ravens. That was huge. I think the contract was good. I think it was a good contract for him. He is an excellent guard, mauler in the run game, holds up well in pass protection. I honestly kind of expected him to get more. I didn't even know that he was a free agent because he's the kind of player that teams don't really let go. But he's going to be an excellent choice for guard, an immediate upgrade over Brandon Scherff, and it kind of really stabilizes our guard position to where I feel like he can hold up even in one-on-one situations. Maybe against like the top D tackles in the league, he'll need some help, like if he was facing a Chris Jones or something like that. But against most defensive tackles, Patrick Mekari should be able to do the job. So that was my favorite signing. I think that was also our biggest signing because we gave him the biggest contract. I can't remember the exact details right now. But Patrick Mekari is definitely my favorite signing. Originally, I had said that we should sign Kevin Zeitler to a deal, and Kevin Zeitler ended up getting a 1-year, $9 million deal from Tennessee. I think that would have been a perfect deal for us to get him and then draft his replacement, and kind of allow that kid to slide in. So we signed Patrick Mekari to a 3-year, $37 million deal. $37 million deal that can earn a max amount of $39 million. Of course, again, a massive need for us offensive line, and Patrick Mekari is a great starting guard, especially in that Ravens system. Everybody knows how much they love to run the ball. Liam Cohen is going to make running the ball a huge point of emphasis in his new offense because I think that's what kind of helped Baker Mayfield get to a whole nother level in Tampa Bay. And I think he's going to think the same thing will happen for Trevor Lawrence if we're able to do that. So boosting the run game is a huge, huge boon for us. And we get that with Patrick Mekari. Like I said, I still liked Kevin Zeitler because he would have been cheaper. But Patrick Mekari solidifies that position for the next 2 or 3 years. So that way we don't really need to. It's a 3-year deal. So if he doesn't play well we don't have to draft a guy to take over for him until 2026. Yeah, realistically 2026 because can't get my years messed up. We're in 2026, so we don't really have to draft another guard until then, which is great because that means we can maybe take a center a little bit earlier this year to take over for the next free agent signing, which is Robert Hainsey. Now, this signing I'm not as thrilled about as everybody. I talked to some of my friends, and it was only like a 3-year set $21 million deal. So he's only getting $7 million a year. It's probably an easy out after 1 year or two. This signing was necessary because we did lose Mitch Morse to retirement, right? So we kind of needed a center option right away. And I can see how the Jaguars didn't want to necessarily swing for the fences with a big name guy and then have to draft a center, like swing for a big name guard and then have to draft a center in the draft in order to replace Mitch Morse because you don't know if he can necessarily hold up and stuff like that. So by giving a modest contract to Patrick Mekari and giving a modest contract to Robert Hainsey, they were able to bring them both in, right? Rather than having to sign one guard for the price of probably. Because Trey Smith would have cost more than them both combined. Of course, he was franchise tagged, so there's not really much to do there. But if we were to have, offered Kansas City a trade for him or something like that, then that would have eaten up draft capital. And we could tell that James Gladstone believes very heavily in the draft. And all the best teams in the NFL also believe very heavily in the draft, like the Ravens and the Steelers. They consistently get their players from the draft, their best players from the draft. So we ended up with Robert Hainsey. Now, again, he knows Liam Cohn's system, right? Because he was with Liam Cohn last year, and he's a center who can. I need to watch the game where the Buccaneers played the Saints because I'm really glad I watched James Gladstone break down the film of why we got a guy like him. Because in camp, well, I don't know if it was in camp or if it was on the regular field, but basically, Graham Barton is obviously very good, first round center that Tampa Bay drafted last year. But he beat out Robert Hainsey, right? And with Graham Barton blocking, and they brought in another guy, I can't remember his name, something Medelson or something like that, at guard. Tampa Bay's run game transformed, right? And it went from like 24th in the league to 4th. And it was a crazy transformation. So my hesitation is like we're bringing in a guy on a nice contract who was essentially a backup last year, right? And we're bringing him in to be a starter to start for us when he lost out to a first round rookie. And again, the first round rookie is probably really good, but that's kind of my point. You see that, like I'm just not sure, right? Not sure if it's going to end up being the right move, but obviously it's not permanent. This is not our center for the next like decade or something. And I think we still have the opportunity to grab a guy who can kind of grow in like the third round. So we don't need to grab an immediate starter at center. That's not really a priority now. So that's nice. That in and of itself is nice. Next, we can move on to our cornerback signing of Jourdan Lewis. He got about, I think, a 3-year, $30 million deal. So he's making about $10 million a year. Again, not a terrible deal or anything like that. He's going to probably play nickel, but he can play inside and out, which gives him flexibility. I was surprised because I kind of thought Jarrian Jones was our guy in the nickel, but Jarrian Jones can also play inside and out. So it sounds like whoever's better inside versus out, like whoever's better inside will probably play out, whoever's better outside will probably play out. You know what I mean? Like they'll kind of compete against each other, but also compete for what spot. But I'm also like, there's a chance Jourdan Lewis could be better than Jarrian Jones inside and out. You know what I mean? Or Jarrian Jones could be better than Jourdan Lewis inside and out. And I don't think this move means that we don't need a cornerback. That's my only issue with this move. I feel like this move signals we don't need to go get a cornerback in the draft. We're good. We got 3 corners that can start. And like, yes, with the Jourdan Lewis signing, you have 3 corners that can start. But for me, what I would be targeting in the draft is either Travis Hunter, and if I don't get him, then I'm targeting Will Johnson because I want Tyson Campbell to. I mean, they paid him like a number 1 corner, right? Trent Baalke did at least. But I want Tyson Campbell to be my number 2 because again, he's just not reliable enough to be my number 1. So he's just not healthy enough. And so drafting a guy like Will Johnson or Travis Hunter, because Tyson Campbell has lots of experience being number 1, he could play number 1 as Travis Hunter and Will Johnson gets up to speed. So, and again, you don't want to put all your chips into the draft, but also it kind of feels like this is the move that's saying, okay, we're going to go after Mason Graham instead of Will Johnson. And I would argue that we need a cornerback more than we need another defensive tackle. Now, a lot of people will say, well, if you have a good defensive line, then your cornerbacks will play better because there's less time to get to the quarterback. And, there's an argument for there, too, as well. I totally get it. I think just the opportunity to take a generational prospect who can play both sides of the ball really well and Travis Hunter is too real to not be ready for. And again, there wasn't that many great, I don't think there was a cornerback on the market who's going to be as good as Travis Hunter or Will Johnson has the potential to be, because Will Johnson has the potential to be like a number 1 corner. And I don't think there was a defensive tackle on the market who's going to be potentially as good as Will Graham is going to be Mason Graham is going to be because Mason Graham is like the prototypical defensive tackle. He's going to be really good. My only thought process was in this draft, the lines for this draft is very deep. Defensive line and offensive line are the deepest positions in the draft. Like quarterback was way stronger last year. Now quarterback isn't very strong this year. The defensive lines are a lot stronger this year. Cornerbacks aren't as strong this year. There's not as many strong cornerback prospects coming out as are our defensive line prospects. So I felt like we could still get a guy who can contribute and start in the later rounds, but we won't get a guy who can usurp Tyson Campbell unless we get Will Johnson or Travis Hunter. So that's kind of my thought process on why, like, okay, signing Jourdan Lewis didn't really move the needle for me. Like, if it took a 1-year, $10 million deal to bring in Calais Campbell, I probably would have signed off on that before signing off on Jourdan Lewis. Because, again, to me, now that we've signed Jourdan Lewis, I don't think we're taking Will Johnson or Travis Hunter in the draft, if either one is available at number 5, which one of them will be. Not even should be. One of them will be. So I definitely think that I kind of I would have done it a little bit differently there. But I feel like that's signifying that we're targeting Mason Graham. And I mean, there's a pretty good chance he'll be there at 5, but we don't even know for sure. That's why it's hard to do free agency before the draft, because free agency, like their plan was we need to put players in positions where we don't have one right now, right? And then that way in the draft we can take the best player available, which makes sense. You fill your holes in free agency, and then in the draft you take the best player available and let the competition win out, which is a good strategy to have. I just think the hole that I would have plugged, I mean, I guess plugging a hole in the draft is like you could still take Will Johnson or Travis Hunter, even though you signed Jourdan Lewis, right? But it just, based upon the fact that we have Jerry and Jones, it doesn't seem very likely anymore. That's my only point. So moving on. We already talked about Robert Hainsey, Patrick Mekari, Jourdan Lewis. We also signed Dyami Brown to a 1-year, $10 million deal. It's a little rich, for a 1-year, $10 million deal for a guy who didn't do anything until the playoffs. But it's also like a very low risk, low reward. He could either, there's a range of outcomes. He could either not do very well, and it's like, okay, well, goodbye. Head somewhere else. Or he could do so well that he prices himself out of our market and we can't hang on to him after the next year, which again would mean that if he does really well, that means that we played really well as a team and possibly got into the playoffs or something like that. So that would also be really good. Or he plays kind of right above where he's earned himself a nice contract, but like a spot within our offense. So we feel like, okay, we kind of need him to go forward. So like, I would say like if he gets over 1,000 yards, like that'd be good to keep him, try to find a deal that we can keep him around. And if he ends up going for like 12, 13, pushing 15, he'll probably price himself out of our team. So I think it's a good addition. I think he's going to compete with Gabe Davis for the third outside receiver spot. It kind of feels like Parker Washington kind of has that slot receiver spot locked up. I don't think, because Dyami Brown didn't really play in the slot. He more stretched the field. And I think he's faster than Gabe Davis, and he just showed more awareness to be in the right route. But again, Gabe Davis was kind of signed because he had a mad playoff run, right? So I'm almost like, what's the difference here? Because Dyami Brown also had a magical playoff run, and that's kind of why we signed him. But, to each their own. That's why we ended up getting Dyami Brown. So hopefully he'll be good for us. So I don't really have like a grade or anything against that deal. I feel like everything that was pointing towards like Travis Hunter is not going to become a Jaguar. I think the Jaguars probably did their reports and like looked out at other teams and saw what they were doing in free agency and came to that conclusion that like I don't think he's going to end up coming to us, so let's just go ahead and move on. So that's that pick right there. Next up, we have for the other signing we did, a lot of them, some of them were just backups, like Hunter Long, and we signed another tight end, can't remember his name. That deal, it doesn't have that big of an impact. He's going to be a backup blocking tight end behind Brenton Strange, because it's now officially the Brenton Strange show, now that Evan Ingram is gone. So that should be interesting. I think Brenton Strange has it in him. If you watch that Packers game, you could really see that Brenton Strange was starting to come on. The question is, can he do it without Evan Ingram being there? And that's why I would have rather have kept Evan Ingram and then kept. I think I would have kept Evan Ingram to give Brenton Strange a little more time to grow, and maybe do sets where Ed Ingram, Evan Ingram is kind of the slot wide receiver, big slot guy, and like where Evan Ingram kind of plays Christian Kirk's role, and then we have you can still get Dyami Brown, you can still have Gabe Davis, even if Travis Hunter was here, they would play on the outside, and you could swap Evan Ingram out with Parker Washington depending on what you wanted to do. I think I still, after all this, I still would have leaned towards keeping Evan Ingram, but we kind of needed some space. So next up, Chuma Edoga. I probably mispronounced his name. I apologize. But that's depth. He's nice because he can play any position along the line, guard, offensive line. He'll be a good swing tackle. We could put him in for big personnel when we've got six guys, and the deal was very team friendly. So that was a very good signing right there. Our new backup quarterback is going to be Nick Mullens, who he. I remember it was so funny. There was a game he played against the Raiders, and I remember he was a 49er and he was playing against the Raiders, and he absolutely shredded them. And by the end of the day, he was like trending on Twitter or something. And I was like, man, I wish we had him. Like, man, I wish we had Nick Mullens on our team. And I can't remember what year it was, if it was 2019 or 2020, or it was a year that we weren't doing well as a franchise, basically. And it's hard to imagine this is his ninth NFL season. But he's a pretty prototypical quarterback, kind of similar style to Trevor Lawrence. Let's just hope Trevor doesn't get hurt. It's like if I compare him to Mac Jones, right? I'm like, I don't know who's better and I don't really know who's worse. I think Gardner Minshew, that would have been my top choice, to be our backup quarterback, which, would have been funny. Gardner Minshew ended up going to the Chiefs as their backup quarterback behind Patrick Mahomes. And they didn't really reveal how much it would be for. It was just a 1 year deal. So again, they probably didn't think of, Nick. They probably didn't think of Patrick Mahomes. They probably didn't think of Gardner Minshew over Nick Mullens as an option. And Nick Mullens, I think, is pretty familiar with Liam Cohen. I still would have preferred Gardner Minshew, but like that move, it's not bad to have Nick Mullens as your backup, but let's just hope that we don't have to use it, right? Like I think it's better. And it's ironic because I think Nick Mullens came in for CJ Beathard, who was hurt, who was our backup quarterback for a couple of years when we had Trevor. So that'll be interesting. But yeah, let's just hope that we don't end up having to use him because I don't even know if there's a game we could win this season if he comes in because our schedule is not easy. Lastly, we have Eric Murray, who played with the Texans on a, again, very team friendly 7 year, $21 million deal. It's not a bad deal at all. I think it kind of makes sense to bring in, obviously it makes sense to bring in a safety. You got to replace Andre Cisco, and they want to be able to take some of the best players in the draft. But because of where we drafted him and everything, and Eric Murray is not, because I think I was also surprised. We'll talk about it in the other free agent moves. Because my choices were for Trevon Moehrig or Tilafana Hufa, or the safety from the 49ers, or even getting Javon Holland, obviously from the Dolphins. But we didn't end up, again, James Gladstone seems like he's not a very swing for the fences kind of guy. He kind of just wants to get guys to plug holes and really wants to build and make his team through the draft, which makes sense. But I still could have seen grabbing one of those guys to like really solidify that safety spot. So maybe you didn't have to take another one because Eric Murray, it kind of feels like we're going to need another top flight safety to pair with him in the draft. So we're probably going to have to double dip and grab a safety in the draft. But I don't know who that's going to end up being. We're going to have to grab another safety in the draft. But I don't know who that's going to end up being depending on how we prioritize certain positions. So, if we end up taking Mason Graham, we'll probably end up in the second round grabbing a safety like Xavier Banks, who I have mocked to us many a time. Xavier Watts, sorry. I've mocked to us many a time. And then in the third round, we'd probably end up getting like more offensive line depth, and maybe a center who can start, maybe an edge guy, something like that. But the main problem is, again, I still think cornerback is our biggest need, and I still think if Travis Hunter's on the board, we should not pass on him. So then that would mean, okay, in the second round, maybe you end up with a defensive tackle because you still want to build up that defensive line room. And there are some guys that are going to slip out of the first round because, again, it's kind of loaded. There's at least 4 or 5 defensive tackles with first round grades on him that are probably going to slip into the second round because, again, the draft is so deep for them. But then if you do that, you won't get Xavier Watts because the safety market isn't deep, but there are some nice safeties in this draft, and it feels like we're gonna have to take one in the second or third round with the signing of Eric Murray. If we had gotten Javon Holland, I would have been like, okay, maybe not till later. So again, we'll see what ends up happening. Let me know your thoughts about our free agency class, how it's going to affect our draft status, how it's going to affect what players that we end up taking. Like I said, no way do I think it's a bad class. I think it could be just as impactful. I mean, I don't think it's a bad class. Only time will tell. But you could tell that Jacksonville did it in a way that they want to be able to get out of these deals once their draft players are ready to step up. And that makes sense because you kind of need as many draft players as possible because Trevor Lawrence's extension is about to kick in, right? And he's going to cost a lot of money pretty soon. So making sure that we have enough guys to fill those spots and fill those roles will be paramount. So let me know what you think. And never forget, it was always the Jags.